Let's have us a tea party.
Right? Yeah. We're going to be getting into it a little bit, right? This all started. I mean, we've been looking for an excuse, if I'm honest, to get you back here on the show.
Oh.
But about a month ago, when I saw all of these headlines about the lawsuit that you had filed against the governor of Nevada, felt like it was way overdue. So give us the kind of broad strokes. Tell us a little bit about your suit, if you would.
Oh, that little thing. Oh,
That little thing, yeah.
Well, I decided to sue the governor of Nevada in order to get the legal brothels of Nevada reopened. Right now, virtually every other industry in the state is open, albeit with some modifications. However, the ranches have remained closed for this entire time. That, coupled with the fact that sex workers were ineligible for SBA loans, paycheck protection loans, any sort of small business offerings from the government, we needed to do something. And so I decided to do something and took it upon myself to sue the governor of Nevada.
Yeah, wow. Not a small task. I mean, that's a lot to take on. I just want to say, I guess, thank you for maybe stepping up to the plate. I'm curious how this impacts other sex workers and what that would really look like for folks not named in the suit.
Well, I structured the suit in such a way that if guests or other folks wanted to join in, that they would have the opportunity and option to do so. However, even with no one signing on to the suit, if it were to be successful, it would result in the reopening of Nevada's brothels, which would allow not just myself to get back to work, but my coworkers, as well as the ranch employees, the majority of which at this point have now been laid off.
Yeah, so this isn't just about damages. This is about overturning these orders and finding perhaps a little bit of justice or equality for sex workers, yeah?
Absolutely, yes. It comes down to that we need to survive. There is only one state of the 50 that has legalized sex work, and how awful would it be to lose that and no longer have that as a part of our country? If the legal brothels go away, there is no more legal sex work in America anywhere to be seen, and I find that to be really problematic. And now we're coming up on a year of these places being closed. How long before people start questioning, do we just leave them closed forever? Do we leave them closed for good? Who knows what happens as a result? We've literally never been closed since we were first legalized in 1970.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And the thing that really bugs me about all of this, apart from the fact that it does, at least seems to me, to be blatant discrimination, is the fact that there are very many people who are going to try and like poo-poo the concerns and be like, oh, well, you're reading into things, or clearly this isn't motivated by any kind of religious fundamentalism or puritanical hangups that Americans have. This is just a coincidence, or, this one little legal, jot and tittle. But I think just considering the climate that we find ourselves in today at the beginning of 2021, it's so very clear what is happening in the U.S. as far as Christian nationalism being pushed on the rest of us. American Atheists just recently put out a list of new legislation that Christian nationalist groups are going to be pushing in 2021 in order to further radicalize the courts. And I think at this point, there is a direct correlation here, right? This is not paranoia. This is not us making things up. This is not anything other than calling this what it is, which is religious discrimination.
I agree entirely. If in Nevada it's legal to gamble and it's legal to smoke indoors, why can't sex workers do something with modifications in order to get back to work?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's an important thing to highlight here. Like, I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, my reading of your suit made it pretty clear you aren't arguing that COVID isn't potentially a good reason to close businesses, but rather that singling out brothels while reopening massage parlors, tattoo shops, hair and nail salons. I mean, all of that makes this very arbitrary and discriminatory. I mean, do I have that right?
Absolutely so. It ends up being just a massive, massive problem in the sense that, well, if we're the only thing that's closed down and everything else gets to remain open, we're being put at a very significant disadvantage to be able to survive this pandemic. That, and like I mentioned earlier, we were excluded from the other forms of financial benefits that were offered to other industries. I personally have not seen a single dime of COVID related relief money, but I lost my entire income as a result.
Yeah, so it's not just we don't want these open, it's we don't want these open, and also we're not going to give back the tax dollars that you pay into the system in order to get you through this.
It's very disheartening, it's very stigmatizing, it's hurtful, but I can't say it's surprising. I can't say it's surprising in the slightest. This is what sex workers have been saying for the longest time, that when we allow different entities to enter into our legal system and make choices, moral choices for people without giving them the option to choose for themselves, it hurts all of us. And right now, sex workers are the ones who are suffering.
Yeah, you know, I feel like you can't get online without reading some think piece about how COVID is going to revolutionize a particular industry. And, you know, whether we're talking about like the way that we release films and sort of our relationship with movie theaters, or ways that we've transitioned restaurants and things like that. It terrifies me a little bit, honestly, to hear you speak as if this could potentially be the end, or the end as we know it, of legalized prostitution in America. How realistic or current do those fears feel right now?
Pretty relevant, especially as we're approaching almost the 1 year anniversary of the last time the places were legally opened. I wonder how long can all of these locations hold on for, especially with no business relief or alternatives for opening. I mean, for God's sakes, let us do something like Boober Eats. We'll go deliver food and lingerie. Like, give us something. Give us any option to survive. That's all we want to do here, is survive the pandemic like everyone else. Of course, it's easy to say the best solution is everyone stays home. Great. Well, then let's pay everyone so they can stay home.
Exactly.
But if we're not going to pay people to stay home, then we need to have a way to survive through this. And with sex stigma being so prevalent, many of my coworkers have been on the receiving end of extreme discrimination when it comes to applying for other jobs in other industries. It's easy to say, just go do something else. Well, when something else doesn't want to have you because you were a sex worker.
Absolutely.
Yeah. At this stage, is there any signs of relief in sight? I mean, I know we're all watching the rollout of the vaccine, and, you know, there's a modicum of hope there, even if it's tempered with a lot of anxieties and everything else. But specific to the industry, is there any reason to believe that these things might be getting better anytime soon? Is there any relief in sight?
Unfortunately not. There's really nothing to look forward to on the horizon except potentially more damaging legislation that further condemns sex workers and scares us off of the only venue we can still legally purvey our services on, the internet.
Mm-hmm. What have you heard as you've been pursuing this? I mean, why is sex work different from massage or any of these other categories? What kind of responses have you been seeing, you know, legally or even just in conversation?
A lot of it has to do with the regulatory boards in regards to massage parlors, and those regulatory boards exist at a state level rather than a county level. Since brothels are legalized at a county level, it would be extremely difficult to have a statewide board to kind of regulate the brothels when they're a county by county legislation issue. For me, this argues that we should legalize sex work at a state level and not just a county by county level, and then allow the counties to not have brothels that don't want to have brothels, but give every single county the option to have brothels. So this way we can have a regulatory board and have all of those assurances that would allow us to then get back to work.
Well, I don't want to get too speculative or catch you too off guard, but is this moment in time, this like shift in the industry, could you see it changing the discussion around legalization versus decriminalization or any other major shakeups in the industry?
I think that the next few months are going to very much shape what happens in regards to sex work in America. Legalized, decriminalized, we are very rapidly coming to a boiling point now, especially with the changeover in the administration. We are going to have some very difficult conversations that I think many Americans have been trying to avoid for a very long time, like a la ostrich with their head in the sand style. We have to talk about it. When we hear all of these buzzwords, sex work, prostitution, sex trafficking, all of the names that have now gotten involved, gosh, I mean, it's everywhere. It is pervasive within the media, and we can't just keep ignoring it. We have to do something about it and have a real nationwide conversation.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm about to hit bingo here on things that would upset my mother. But this conversation feels kind of reminiscent of the fact that poll after poll after poll seems to show that marijuana is becoming more and more accepted. But on a national and federal level, there's still all of these issues. And at a time where I feel like having an OnlyFans account or dipping your toe into professional sex work or semi-professional sex work is becoming more and more accepted. But the powers that be are honestly getting worse in many ways. It feels like the vice is tightening in a lot of ways. Do you see that on your end?
100% yes. From the legislation changes as a result of Bella Thorne scamming people on OnlyFans to the changes that we're seeing positioned by Mitch McConnell trying to tie Section 230 to COVID relief. Like, oh, I'm sorry. That would have been like an even worse problem than SESTA and FOSTA itself was. And now we have the new little sister entering the arena, the CISA bill. It's just, oh my God, we're really getting attacked front, left, right, and center.
Yeah, how is COVID adding to those barriers? I mean, obviously, we're talking about the closing of a lot of different forms of legalized sex work, whether we're talking about strip clubs or prostitution and a number of other things. How is that pressure intensifying at this stage in the pandemic?
It's like a pressure cooker that's coming to a boil and the lid's about to blow if there isn't some relief in sight. So many people, vast majority of the industry has been affected. I would argue 95% of the industry has been negatively impacted, with perhaps primarily phone sex operators being the only group reporting benefits from the closure. Not even camp girls are necessarily having a great time right now because they can no longer travel and do collaborations or create the same type of content that they once were. It is very difficult to be a sex worker in America, let alone have that as your primary income stream, when it feels like the whole wide world, including the law, is against you.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Alice. Sorry, Christy. I'm curious because it almost feels to me like this came out of left field for the people that you took to account here. Like this feels like something that they were expecting to get away with, expecting to be able to like slip in there and not have to like worry about or have a national conversation about. Is that your sense? Is this something that they're shocked to even have to talk about?
Look at the way that our Congress critters and senators discuss things like SESTA and FOSTA. Look at the way that they wrinkle their nose when they say the word sex, the way that they say prostitute. They make like a face with it. They're so uncomfortable. They're visibly uncomfortable saying these things. I'm sorry, but if you can't handle those words, I really feel like you're not able to handle legislating around those topics in the first place, which clearly they're not ready for.
It's a good point.
I have to say, my absolute favorite part of the whole lawsuit experience was legally having to explain medical fetish to a Zoom call full of judges and lawyers, and all I see are multiple cameras of people just doing their very best to not just start giggling as we're handling this. It was a real treat for me, I have to say. It finished 2020 off in style.
Oh my goodness.
I can only imagine the ones with tells that you're like, oh, that guy gets it. He knows. He doesn't want anybody else to know that he knows, but we know that he knows.
It was very entertaining, to say the least. Some of the topics and services having to be discussed in court. Sex positions entered the equation at one point. So
Right.
Describe for the court exactly what is doggy style. Oh, Your Honor, it would be my delight. It just, what a, I can't wait to read the transcript of that. I mean,
That is beautiful. Is that a public thing? Because
I sure hope so. Or if I can legally make it public, I will make it public. I would assume that it has to be public record, but I mean,
oh my goodness,
some of those lines.
We should
I
have
was
a
just about to
dramatic
say, we need to have Seraphine on for another
Yes.
dramatic reading. That sounds like
my
a very good time. And it really does beg the question. I know we're talking around this, and I know there's not one simple answer, but this show is clearly not the first or only one to point out that, breaking your back in a factory that you don't own is no less selling your body than running an OnlyFans or any of these other things. So why do we still get YouTube comments saying that, sex work is not real work?
Religious stigma, dogma, media, propagation of horrible stereotypes, the refusal of celebrities to come out and speak openly about their own sex work experiences. Granted, that last one is slowly but surely starting to change, bless Cardi B. But also, we need more of that. We need vocal allies in major spaces and more of them. We need lawyers and doctors. We need 24 more AOCs. Like, we gotta get there. That's what we need.
Yeah. Do you feel, as the conversation sort of shifts back and forth and we see this this boiling point and this huge division between our lawmakers and their constituency, is there any reason to believe that the national conversation is shifting in the direction that it needs to?
Slowly. I don't think we're going to be there quite yet. We're ready to talk about it for the first time and have that baby level entry conversation. Much in the same way that as a country, we've been kind of dancing with marijuana for almost 15 to 20 years now, going through the motions of are we not, are we okay with it? We're about to start that 10 to 20 year dance with sex work, I think, where we're going to entertain the idea, we're going to dance around with it, we're going to parade it, and then we're going to put it back in the filing cabinet for another 4 years, and then we're going to take it out and we're going to parade it around, but this time with a different hat on its head, and then maybe we'll slowly but surely make progress, and it's going to take the presentation of it again and again and again and again and again and again and many, many, many more times, which is one of the reasons why I felt it was so important to file the suit in the first place. We need more documented cases about sex work, arguing in support of it. We need those accounts legally to create standing and basis for future cases. So, I mean, it in some ways is a win no matter what, because the courts agreed to hear the case. They could have thrown it out, but they chose to hear it anyway. So that's something, damn it.
They wanted to get a little more info on Doggy Style.
Apparently, oh God, could you imagine?
It's the only way they have access without feeling guilty about it.
Oh God,
I do want to point out
that makes so much sense now. It was just like a secret sex ed session. That's what was happening there.
I need to relate to the kids. I do want to point out this book, which is something that it changed my perception of the conversation around sex in America. It's Sex and the Constitution by Jeffrey Stone, and it is really well done. And it documents how religion specifically has influenced our laws and our constitutional interpretations around things like sex work, around feminism in general, around abortion, all of these topics that are related to sex, and gives you that really big, broad bird's eye view of things. So for anyone out there who's interested in learning more about this, who may be grappling with this idea that legislatively we are biased against the concept of sex as a country, this is a really good starting place, and it's very well written. So highly recommend. This is a good beach read that'll get you looks.
A good beach read for sure. Well, I'll make sure to have links to that in the show notes for this episode. And I, of course, want to remind folks that we are still available here at 512-991-9242. If you'd like to give us a call, if you want to weigh in about any of this or anything else that might be on your mind. But I'm really curious, Alice, what the reaction has been to your suit. You know, what kinds of things you've been hearing. You're already like very publicly centered and sort of a face of the industry, but I can only imagine that this was a bit of a lightning rod experience. I mean, did you attract wanted or unwanted attention as you were raising these issues?
It was a mixed bag for sure. A little good, a little bad, a little shocking. Unfortunately, we've decided to polarize and politicize COVID-19. And so this became an extension of that continued conversation, which is ironic because I do not identify any sort of political motivation in either direction with this suit. There was no politics involved here, and yet 9 out of every 10 conversations I had dove right into the politics of businesses being opened or closed. And that's not the conversation that we should be necessarily having in regards to this. I thought it really problematic that rather than letting this be a lightning rod for sex workers' rights and our ability to survive this, instead it kind of turned into a little bit of a continuation of the political showboat that we've already have seen and we're all sick and tired of.
Yeah, please, Vee, go right ahead.
It's interesting that, and this is, I feel like this is a symptom, and I know I'm waxing a little bit philosophical here, so forgive me, but I do know that this feels like a symptom of that dualistic kind of thinking, that very black and white, this or that, one or the other kind of worldview that a lot of Americans seem to have about a variety of topics, good or bad, this liberal or conservative, and if it's not one, it has to be the other. And so you look at it as something like this, which is very practical, which is very, frankly, more of a libertarian, I would even say, lawsuit in terms of, hey, this is me, this is my body, this is my job, give me what the freedom to do what I want to do in order to make money. They look at that and they go, well, that can't be a GOP thing, right? That can't be a Republican thing because it's talking about sex. So by default, it must be some kind of liberal progressive agenda, which it isn't either, right? It's just it's people expressing their needs in the legal way. And yeah, I don't know. I'm consistently and forever always annoyed at this dichotomy, black and white kind of situation that dualism presents.
it's toxic when we feel the need to make absolutist statements about any topic, any aspect of our society. All sex workers must be this, all people with beards must be that. We end up being wrong about 50% of the time. Could we get some of it right? Sure, I'm sure statistically some of it is accurate, but certainly not the whole of it. And when we paint things with these broad strokes, we miss all of the nuances and the detail. And oftentimes that's really where justice and liberty tends to live, is in the nuances and in the details. Why is this suit important? What is the reason behind the ranches being closed? How come they can't open, but more intimate industries arguably can? It certainly would be riskier to get a tattoo right now than it would be to see a sex worker. We all know that when you get a tattoo, it lowers your immune system, but we're okay with that. It's riskier to smoke right now. We know that it's related to the lungs, and it's very, very dangerous, in fact, to smoke. But we haven't outlawed cigarettes. In fact, we still allow people to smoke cigarettes inside of casinos in Nevada. So it's just, it's very double, triple standard here. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it does make a lot of sense in terms of money, as far as the casinos are a valuable industry, and comparatively, the rather small legal sex work industry is not nearly as large.
Interesting. This week is interesting. This is an interesting week.
This whole year already.
This whole week of a year.
This one that just started already feels a full year long. But I am curious about the continued shifts in the industry. As one of the faces of legal prostitution, I am very interested to hear how you feel watching more and more people kind of dip their toes into that type of like secondary income, part-time sort of sex work, and if that might be a engine for changing things here.
I'm kind of two minds with it. I'm optimistic, but also wary. I'm optimistic because this looks like us having more allies, which is a great thing for the industry. The more, the merrier. My concern, however, is that many of the folks who are just kind of dipping their toe in may not be aware of the ramifications of sex stigma and how that could affect them for the rest of their lives. For example, if you work at a brothel, even for just 2 weeks, it could show up on a security clearance 10 years down the line. That's very, very long reaching for a 2-week-long decision. My fear is that the same thing will hold true with some of these online medias. We know that when something is on the internet, it lives on the internet forever. No matter how hard we try to delete it or scrub it, once it is online, it is out there, and God only knows where it will end up. So for someone to enter sex work casually and put their face out there, they could risk losing their primary form of income, such as the EMT in New York. Granted, they vocally said that they're not interested in no longer having her work there. They came out in support of her, but the fact that she was risked in the first place for having an OnlyFans is ridiculous. And the fact that was a big deal story is also ridiculous. The fact that we're sensationalizing an EMT doing sex work. For God's sakes, I'm one of 3 EMTs I know that do sex work, but you don't see a big scandaloso article about that. Oh no, because sex work somehow in our society is still taboo enough to warrant headlines, to warrant media. Not when sex workers do sex work, however, but when somebody else does sex work, Bella Thorne, an EMT, whichever, whatever. We talk about it like it's the most groundbreaking, incredible thing, when it's something that's been happening for a very long time, and folks that represent that have been in the industry for a very long time too.
That's a really good point. That reminds me of the big to-do about Harry Styles wearing a dress. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, why? It's nice that you care, I guess, but also like, I don't know. Like there, yeah.
What are we supposed to do with that?
Yeah, right. Like, okay, so do you support trans people now, or is it only cool because it's Harry Styles? Like there is that dichotomy between a celebrity doing a transgressive thing, and people who just are that thing. And yeah, I don't know. I think part of my question, and Christy, I'm curious about your thoughts on this as well. Do you think that part of the reason that sex work as kind of that compound word, that concept, one of the reasons that that's so traumatizing for people, or triggering, traumatizing is probably not the right word, but triggering and upsetting, is because we still tend to view sex as this like sacred, untouchable thing. And so to make something that is supposedly sacred and of God into work, there's an aspect there that is uncouth in some way, or maybe even blasphemous. I'm wondering if there's a connection there. What do you guys think?
I think that there absolutely is. And I'm going to answer it from the standpoint of a few different sex workers I've spoken to and who have shared their thoughts on it. There seems to be this mythology that sex work is only acceptable if the sex worker views this as being some part of their greater purpose for being here, their life's mission, that it has to be more than just a job, that it has to be ultimately fulfilling, and the main reason for your existence is to fulfill this role, and anything less than that makes the job less acceptable, when we don't expect that same kind of dedicated response from literally any other profession. Just because I find sex work to be fulfilling doesn't mean that all sex workers do, nor must they inherently find it fulfilling in order for it to still be a job. I mean, sex work is work. Being a teacher is work. Being a therapist is work. Being a doctor, oh my God, is being a doctor work? Oh my goodness, that's incredible work. It can be fulfilling work. It could be challenging work, but it is work. Why is sex work different?
Yeah, and I'll say that certainly just the word sex, the notion of sex, I mean, that carries a lot, and people bring to the table a lot of assumptions about what that's supposed to be and how it's supposed to look. But even in a broader sense, I feel like people are largely uncomfortable with commodified relationships. And we can tie that into a like very heteronormative patriarchal society that sort of puts things into very particular conventions and says, this type of relationship looks like this, that type of relationship looks like that. You have to be monogamous, you have to be straight, you have to be this, that, and the other. And we really hamstring ourselves with these societal conventions that say all relationships need to look a particular way. And I feel like that discomfort is part of what is at play here. I mean, I made this comparison last time you were on, Little, and Alice, and I don't mean to overstress it, but we both work in situations where people pay us to be in a relationship with them. And that's very different than what most people are comfortable with. Nobody likes to really conceptualize their therapy that way. They don't like to think of any relationship as being tied to money, because money is the root of all evil. And we're supposed to pretend that money is wrong and that it's bad and that it corrupts. And that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. But I think that the money part of sex work, the work part of sex work, is as uncomfortable for a lot of folks as the sex part of sex work is. I don't know. Does that feel fair to either?
Very, very, very fair. And it's funny you say like money being the root of all evil. Well, I think it all depends on how do you framework money. Are you buying a relationship, or are you using something that our society has deemed to be an asset to show your appreciation for that person's contribution in your life? When I purchase artwork, I'm not buying a painting. I am paying that artist for their labor, for their creation, and my appreciation of that. So this way I can take that object home and then admire it, and it adds value to my life. When you pay a therapist, you are paying for your appreciation of the value that they are bringing to your life. So produce is the same thing. You are paying for the apple. You are buying that farmer's labor. You are paying for him to go out there and water the tree and harvest the apple and put it in a box and put it on a truck and take it to the grocery store. And then you're paying for the grocery store workers, labor to unpack it and then ring you. It's all labor. It's all the same thing. It doesn't matter what you're buying. You're paying for work that someone has done that brings value to your life. I mean, what that is going to be different, but why are we treating it as if some is different than others?
Mm-hmm. Not just different, but inherently better or worse too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it ties to just sort of the alienation and sort of the way that we view money, not as a result of labor, but as this kind of distinct enterprise. And I feel like I could go down that rabbit hole with y'all all night. I want to give V a chance to jump into the phones real quickly, but Alice, I cut you off. Let me give you a moment to jump in here.
Oh, the only thing I was going to add to that is oftentimes the controls around relationships speak to the insecurities around sex and sex acts. We know that the church isn't comfortable with homosexual sex acts, and so therefore a relationship must be between a man and a woman so we can control that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is the... It's not surprising. It's disheartening, but not surprising that this is something that is so contentious because it feels like it sits at the center of so many different overlapping hangups that we have as a country. And so unless we address literally this entire Venn diagram of everything else that's underlying it, it's going to be really difficult to actually get to the root of this and get people the money they need to survive.